Have you ever caught yourself thinking something like, if I can just make it through this, maybe I'll finally become the person I'm supposed to be. If I just prove myself, if I can fix everything I broke, maybe I'll be enough. If I become stronger, maybe I'll deserve to rest. These thoughts don't sound like lies. In fact, they sound noble, hopeful, even empowering. But underneath, they often hide a quieter, crueler belief that you are not enough yet, that your pain must one day justify itself by transforming you into someone better. That belief doesn't come out of nowhere. We were raised on stories that taught us to see pain as a rite of passage. It's the trauma arc, the comeback kid, the villain turned hero. Every breakdown is secretly a setup. Every flaw is waiting for its redemption. But what if healing doesn't always look like growth? What if some wounds just exist? What if you don't need to become someone better? What if the whole idea of earning peace is part of the problem? This isn't a video about how to redeem yourself, okay? This is a video about why you think you need to. The protagonist trap. We live in a culture obsessed with main characters. On social media, everyone's curating their arc, posting their before and after, tracking their globe, narrating their recovery like it's a montage with an end goal. In fiction, we eat up stories about characters who were once broken but fought their way to wholeness. Zuko earns forgiveness. Kaneki becomes strong. Shinji saves the world. Somewhere along the way, we start doing it to ourselves. We start thinking, maybe I'm broken now, but one day I'll become someone who deserves love, deserves rest, deserves to be seen. We don't just suffer, we assign purpose to our suffering. We believe our trauma is secretly a transformation waiting to happen. Psychologists call this narrative identity, the human tendency to make sense of life through story. Especially during pain, we crave meaning. Chaos is unbearable. A plot, even a tragic one, gives structure. But here's the problem. Not every experience is a plot point. Not every feeling needs a payoff. When we trap ourselves inside the protagonist's fantasy, we start believing a few dangerous things. That we're only lovable after we've changed. That we have to earn our way out of pain. That we're wasting our suffering if we don't become something powerful because of it. Anime is full of characters who live and die by these beliefs. Tico thinks the only way to reclaim his worth is to become someone his father respects or defeats. He's never allowed to just be hurt. Kei, he needs a redemption arc. Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul doesn't get to process his trauma. Instead, his suffering is glamorized, turning him into something darker, cooler, more badass. Shinji in Evangelion spends the entire series trying to feel enough, not for himself, but for the story he thinks he's supposed to be fulfilling. We watch these stories and internalize their shape. Pain gives growth, gives redemption, gives peace. It feels intuitive, even aspirational. What happens when that arc never arrives? What happens when we keep hurting but don't become stronger? When the peace we were promised never materializes? When we try to heal but still feel like the same broken person? That's when the trap tightens. We tell ourselves, I must not be healing correctly. Maybe I haven't suffered enough. Maybe I need a bigger downfall before I can rise. Without realizing it, we turn healing into performance. We start measuring our progress by how useful our pain becomes. We stop feeling our emotions and start narrating them. This is what trauma expert Dr. Kabor describes as the pressure to make pain productive. We turn healing into a transaction. I suffered, therefore I must change. Therefore, I deserve peace. It's not healing, it's bargaining. It's bargaining. And here's what nobody tells you. You're allowed to heal, even if you never grow from it. You're allowed to just hurt and survive and still deserve love, right? The protagonist fantasy seduces us because it gives pain a purpose. But sometimes, purpose is not what we need. Sometimes, what we need is permission. Permission to rest. Permission to not perform. permission to be a person, not a narrative. Redemption is a lie. We grow up believing in redemption like it's gravity, invisible but constant. We don't question it because it's sewn into every story we love. The idea is simple. If you suffer enough, if you endure long enough, if you prove you've changed, then you get peace, then you get love, then you're finally deserving of everything you've been denied. But that's not healing. That's a transaction. And the problem with transactional healing is that it treats pain like currency. You start thinking, if I collect enough scars, maybe the world will pay me back. That mindset doesn't just come from fairy tales and film. It shows up in real life, in subtle, corrosive ways. Maybe you've seen it in yourself, staying in a toxic relationship because you think walking away would make you weak, and enduring it proves your strength, refusing to ask for help until you've hit rock bottom, because somewhere you've learned that help is only for the desperate. Fantasizing about some distant future version of yourself, rich, famous, successful, and using it as proof that all this suffering will have been worth it. Redemption becomes the excuse to keep bleeding, because the pain has to mean something, right? Okay? And so we stay in cycles that hurt us, not because we don't know better, but because we're still hoping the pain will pay off. This is the dark side of the redemption arc. It teaches us that suffering is only valid if it leads to something beautiful. But what if it doesn't? What if the bad thing was just bad? What if there's no gold star at the end of your grief? No transformation montage after the heartbreak. No applause when you finally get out of bed. Redemption doesn't always look like salvation. Sometimes it looks like self-destruction with good PR. You tell yourself you're becoming stronger, but really, you're just becoming numb. You think you're earning peace, but you keep moving the goalpost. You want to heal, but only if healing comes with proof that you were worth the pain. And if you don't transform fast enough, you start blaming yourself. I must not be growing hard enough. Maybe I need to suffer more. Maybe I deserve this. This is how we turn the idea of redemption into a prison, okay? And no story captures this trap more hauntingly than Guts from Berserk. Guts is driven by vengeance, okay? He was betrayed, used, and brutalized by someone he trusted. And in response, he dedicates his entire life to rage. Every scar on his body becomes a monument to how hard he's fought. Every enemy he slaughters is another step in a spiral of retribution. But here's what's terrifying. He doesn't know how to stop. He's not trying to live. He's trying to deserve living, okay? In the process, he becomes consumed by the very pain he thought he was escaping. His trauma doesn't transform him into a hero. It turns him into a ghost of himself, a man who's still fighting a war that already ended. That's the truth about redemption fantasies. They don't free you. They just give your suffering prettier chains. Or take Kyo from Fruit's Basket, another kind of tragedy. Kyo isn't angry at the world. He's angry at himself. He believes he's unlovable, monstrous, broken beyond repair. So, instead of asking for love, he tries to earn it by suffering, apologizing, repressing. He thinks, if I'm good enough, maybe I'll be accepted. If I hurt enough, maybe I'll be forgiven. But the forgiveness never comes, because Kyo's real wound isn't a curse that binds him. It's the belief that he must suffer to be seen. He doesn't need redemption. He needs to be told, you were never ruined to begin with. Carl Jung believed redemption myths were among the most powerful stories in the human psyche. He called them archetypes, timeless patterns that echo across cultures, religions, and dreams. The hero who falls and rises, the sinner who repents, the monster who becomes human again. These stories exist for a reason. They can be healing. They remind us that change is possible, that no one is beyond salvation, okay? But archetypes become dangerous when we internalize them literally, when we believe we are only worthy of love after suffering, when we think we need a dark night of the soul to earn joy, when we expect our worst moments to someday make us better people. That's when the archetype becomes poison, because real life doesn't work that way. Not every pain has a payoff. Not every trauma leads to growth. And not every broken heart makes you stronger. Sometimes you don't become a hero. Sometimes you just survive. And that is still enough. Here's what they don't tell you. You don't need to change your life to be lovable. You don't need to hit rock bottom to ask for help. You don't need to become someone else to deserve peace. Redemption is not a requirement. Your pain is not an audition. Maybe the most radical thing you can do in a world obsessed with overcoming is to stop trying to become someone new and start honoring who you already are. No climax, no plot twist, no poetic payoff, just you, still here, still breathing, still worthy. You don't need to redeem yourself. You were never ruined to begin with. Trauma does not equal transformation. There's a quiet expectation that follows pain. It's a whisper that says, at least make it mean something. We are taught that suffering must be redeemed through strength, that every wound should become wisdom, and that if it doesn't, we've failed twice. But what if that's not healing? What if that's performance? What if the need to transform pain into purpose is just another disguise for shame? In anime and in life, we are surrounded by characters who suffer not only because of what happened to them, but because they feel obligated to make it worth it, as if surviving isn't enough, as if hurting needs a thesis statement. Let's take Erwin Smith from Attack on Titan, a man who sends hundreds to their deaths, not just because the mission demands it, but because he needs their sacrifices to mean something. He clings to a childhood dream, one that keeps his own guilt at bay. His leadership is powerful, even admirable, but it's not free. Erwin is haunted, not only by the bodies he's climbed over, but by the pressure to justify them, to alchemize trauma into strategy. His death becomes a metaphor, not for peace, but for usefulness. Then there's Naruto, a boy who grows up utterly alone, dismissed, shunned, unloved. And instead of grieving that loss, he builds his identity around proving it was worth it. He says, I'm going to be Hokage, so everyone has to acknowledge me. That sounds brave, and it is. But behind the courage is a child who believes that being in pain is only okay if it ends in applause. These are stories that move us deeply, but we rarely ask why. Why do we find meaning only in struggle that's redeemed? Why are we more comfortable with scars that shine than wounds that ache? Because we've been conditioned to believe that trauma must be productive, that healing means never crying again. That peace looks like a perfect monologue. It's worse, we've been sold the lie that if pain doesn't turn into power, then we're doing it wrong. About it. In psychology, especially in trauma theory, that couldn't be further from the truth. Trauma is not transformation, it's fragmentation. It's not a clean break, like a chapter ending. It's a shattering of continuity, of trust, of identity. It turns time into noise. It makes the past feel present. It rewires the brain so safety feels unfamiliar and danger feels normal. When something traumatic happens, the self doesn't evolve. It fractures. People don't always grow from pain. Sometimes they shrink, they dissociate, they isolate. Sometimes the lesson isn't empowering, it's paralyzing, And that's not weakness, that's human. The idea that pain should always make us stronger isn't compassion, it's capitalism. It's the commodification of recovery. It's the pressure to turn suffering into a success story, to market our grief as growth. To say, look how far I've come, before we've even sat with the pieces. Anime often romanticizes this too. Characters lose family, friends, entire homes, and then declare, I'll become stronger because of this. But in real life, that's not how healing works. Healing isn't a speech. It's not a training arc. It's not even linear. It's messy, slow, often invisible. It's learning how to sit with feelings you were never allowed to have. It's crying over something 10 years old and realizing you've never mourned it. It's finding parts of yourself, gentle, terrified, abandoned parts, and letting them come back to the table. Because trauma splits the self, and real healing is integration, not transformation. You don't need to become someone new after pain. You need to become whole again, or maybe for the first time. But here's the trap. When society rewards those who rise quickly, quietly, and beautifully from their pain, the pressure to perform resilience becomes its own kind of suffering. You smile, you say, "I'm fine." You quote something inspiring, but inside, you're numb or hyper-aware or angry and don't know why. And when you break, even just a little, you feel like a fraud. Because wasn't this pain supposed to change you? Maybe that's the most dangerous myth of all, okay? That if trauma doesn't sculpt you into a hero, then it sculpted you wrong. Let's go back to Naruto. Tells himself and everyone else that his pain made him who he is. But we also see the cracks. We see how he pushes his body past breaking point, how he risks death over and over to earn love, how he becomes obsessed with saving Sasuke, not just because of loyalty, but because he can't bear to lose someone again. He's not just chasing friendship, he's chasing redemption for his own hurt. It's beautiful, and it's heartbreaking, 'cause you realize Naruto doesn't believe he's allowed to rest, not until the pain has a purpose. Now, think about your own life. If you ever force yourself to be okay too soon, slap a lesson over something that still stings, smile through a storm, because being strong felt safer than being honest. That's the voice of the world speaking. The one that says, pain without progress is pointless. But that's not true. You don't have to win your trauma. You don't have to make it poetic. You don't have to write a comeback story to be worthy of rest. You are allowed to just hurt, and you are still whole, even when you feel broken. In trauma therapy, there's a saying, the opposite of trauma is not happiness, it's connection. Not with the world, not with the goal, with yourself, with the version of you that's still hiding under the bed, still waiting for someone to say, it wasn't your fault, still terrified that feeling pain means being weak, still pretending that if they just smile hard enough, they'll be loved again. Real healing isn't always visible. It's not a transformation montage. It's not a motivational quote. It's quieter than that. It's you breathing deeper than before. It's you saying no to what once felt necessary. It's you letting go of the need to make everything make sense. So, if no one's told you this yet, you don't have to earn your peace. You don't have to write a redemption arc for every wound. You don't need your pain to become something in order for you to be someone. You are not broken for still hurting. You are human. The hero complex is a cage. There's a reason we fall in love with heroes. They suffer, they grow, they triumph, and in the end, they become whole. That arc is comforting, not just in fiction, but in how we see ourselves. We want our pain to rise. We want our struggles to resolve. We want our lives to make sense the way a story does, with build-up, climax, catharsis, and peace. But real life doesn't move like a narrative. And if you live trying to become a symbol, you may never allow yourself to simply become a self. In Jungian psychology, there's a concept called individuation. It's the process of becoming whole, integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of who you are. Okay. But here's the thing. Individuation isn't about becoming perfect or victorious or enlightened. It's about becoming real, not polished, integrated. And it doesn't end in a golden moment. There is no final battle, no last speech, no music swelling as the credits roll. Individuation is not a finale. It's a lifelong unfolding. And when we forget that, we imprison ourselves in the very myths we admire. In anime and storytelling, wholeness is often treated as a destination. Think of character arcs like those in shonen or cinematic narratives. The hero faces obstacles, overcomes them, and reaches a transformed self. And then, they're done. The arc completes, the camera fades to white. But in real life, healing doesn't work that way. Growth doesn't arrive with clarity and applause. It shows up in confusion, in quiet choices, in days when nothing seems to change, and yet something inside you softens. You don't wake up whole, you wake up still becoming. You wake up doubting, aching, craving meaning, and some days you don't find it. Some days you simply survive, and that's not failure, it's life, unscripted. Take Violet Evergarden. She begins the series with no understanding of human emotion. A girl raised for war, now living in peace, but unable to access it. She's not chasing a title. She's not trying to become Hokage, or king, or savior. She just wants to understand what I love you means. Her journey is not explosive. It's letter by letter, word by word. It's sitting with strangers and feeling what they feel until her own emotions finally begin to surface. There's no climax where Violet is declared healed. There's no arc that ends with applause. There's only a quiet, persistent opening of the heart, a becoming that never finishes. And perhaps that's the point. There is no finish line, no moment where you're declared fixed or flawless. Or look at Mob from Mob Psycho 100, a boy with unimaginable psychic power who spends most of the series learning how not to use it. He's not trying to be the strongest, he's trying to be himself. Mob realizes that power doesn't define him, and even more importantly, that peace isn't about suppressing his shadow, but accepting it. His transformation isn't a victory march, it's humility, small kindnesses. It's walking home after school with his friends and knowing that he's allowed to just be a kid. There's a quiet revolution in that, 'cause in a world obsessed with becoming, being is radical. These stories reflect something profound, that real growth isn't cinematic. It's not made for an audience. It's not a climax. It's a quiet unfolding. BoJack Horseman pushes this even further. He doesn't win at the end of his arc. He doesn't become a model of redemption. It's messy, selfish, human, and yet there are glimmers, a conversation, a pause. It's a sunset that doesn't demand explanation. BoJack reminds us that healing isn't always inspiring. Sometimes it's surviving. Sometimes it's choosing not to spiral, even if just for one day. Sometimes it's boring, repetitive, incomplete, and that's okay. So why do we still chase the heroic resolution? Because it's easier to think of ourselves as a project, a build, a protagonist with a plot, than to sit with the truth that who we are is not a role, that healing doesn't have a climax, and that wholeness isn't something we earn. The hero complex is seductive. It gives us a script: endure, grow, succeed. It tells us that we're only valuable if we're useful. It convinces us that unless we overcome dramatically, visibly, courageously, then we haven't made it. But this is still performance. This is still chasing a mere version of self, one curated for admiration. And in doing so, we miss the real self, waiting quietly behind the curtain. It's a part of us that never wanted to be brave, that never asked for a redemption arc, that just wanted to be safe. You don't need to climax. You don't need to become a legend. You don't need to rise from every fall with a speech. Sometimes the most honest growth is unremarkable. It's drinking water when you'd rather disappear. It's canceling plans to rest. It's saying, I don't know, without shame. It's looking in the mirror and not trying to narrate it. In Jungian terms, this is integration. It's not eliminating flaws, but embracing them. Not being good all the time, just being whole. You are not a brand. You are not a story arc. You are not a symbol of resilience. You are a living, breathing, unfinished person, and that is enough. But let's ask something uncomfortable. If you were never impressive, never healed correctly, never found a perfect path through the wreckage, would your life still be valid? Would you still feel real? We don't like that question because we've tied our self-worth to our redemption. We think, if I don't become someone extraordinary, then all this pain was pointless. But pain doesn't need a point to be honored. Your existence isn't a thesis statement. Imagine for a moment that you never became anyone impressive. That you were never recognized for your struggles. That your life didn't build to some grand redemptive turning point. Would it still be worth living? If that question terrifies you, you've been trapped by the hero complex, and it's time to unlearn it. Because here's the truth. You're allowed to heal without proving it. You're allowed to change without explaining it. You're allowed to exist without becoming inspirational. Wholeness isn't a prize at the end of pain. It's not a badge you unlock once you've earned peace. Wholeness is not earned, it's allowed. It was always yours. It's just been waiting for you to stop performing and start being. You are not a character arc. You are not a myth. You are not a motif. You are not a parable waiting to be resolved. You are not a hero. You are not a villain. You are not a symbol for suffering, nor a metaphor for hope. You are not a character arc. You are a person, alive in this moment, Real, not because of what you've overcome, or how inspiring your story sounds when retold, but simply because you exist. We don't say that enough, that you are allowed to be real, even if you're unfinished, even if the plot hasn't resolved. Even if there is no audience clapping at the end of this scene. We live in a world obsessed with resolution. Every book closes with meaning. Every movie fades out with peace. Every post online is a captioned reflection, what it taught us, what we become, how we rose above. But real life doesn't always hand out lessons. Some pain doesn't clarify. Some endings aren't redemptive. Sometimes you hurt, and then you just heal, quietly, without grandeur, without applause. And that's not failure. That's not incompleteness. That's not a missed arc. That's simply living. The philosopher Rumi once said, "The wound is where the light enters you." It's beautiful, poetic, resonant, and often true. Pain can be a portal. But what we don't say as loudly is this: the wound doesn't have to teach you anything. It can just be a wound. And it can just heal. Not everything broken needs to become beautiful. Not every bruise needs to mean something. Sometimes healing isn't enlightenment. Sometimes healing is just rest. A day without crying. A meal you actually taste. A moment when you forget you are hurting at all. That, too, is enough. But we crave meaning. We want the pain to matter. We want the chaos to culminate in clarity. We want to believe that all this struggle is leading somewhere. So we narrate, we script ourselves, we edit our lives like prose, cutting the messy bits, keeping the redemption. Say things like, "I had to go through that so I could become who I am." Or, "Everything happens for a reason. But what if it didn't? What if you just suffered? What if it wasn't meant to happen? What if there's no story? It's just a sequence of moments, both awful and ordinary. Would you still feel valid? Would your life still feel real? There's something terrifying about being unfinished. We want closure. We want to know that the pain was for something, that the love meant something, so that the ending ties it all together. Neat, resolved, digestible. But life is not a novel. It's not a 3-act structure. It's not a hero's journey. There are no arcs, only spirals. No moral, only meaning we assign. And maybe it's not emptiness. Maybe it's freedom. 'Cause if there's no script, then there's no right way to heal. No pressure to be wise. No pressure to be whole before you're ready. You can just live. You can just feel. You can just be, without performing yourself for an imaginary audience. Anime so often gives us arcs, neat lines, character development, redemption. But life is more like a slice of life series. Messy, unresolved, beautiful in its dailiness. A quiet conversation, it's a moment of silence, a sky that turns orange while no one is watching. Think of March comes in like a lion. Ray doesn't have a single arc. He circles through loneliness, healing, regression, warmth, and back again. There's no final moment where he wins. He simply keeps living, eating, laughing, being loved, even when he feels unlovable. And maybe that's all we need. Not to complete our character development, not to be inspirational, to keep showing up. You're not a self-help book. You're not a motivational quote. You're not a protagonist chasing catharsis. You are a breathing being, flawed, sacred, inconsistent. Some days you'll feel brave. Other days you'll feel broken. And both are valid. Both are part of you. Not because they build towards something, but because they are something. Right now, in this breath, in this hour. So, let me ask you this. What if you didn't need a story? What if you didn't need to narrate your worth? What if your softness was allowed? What if your limits were not failures? What if your pain didn't have to be beautiful to be real? Maybe you don't need a story. Maybe you just need a life. Not a perfect one, not an inspiring one, just a real one. And maybe the most radical thing you can do is to stop trying so hard to be good and just start being real. Not for anyone else, not for applause, just for you. You're allowed to just be. Let's stop here. Not with a conclusion, not with a takeaway. Just a breath. You don't have to become anything right now. You don't have to tie your story into a bow. You don't have to figure out what it all meant, because you're not unfinished. You're just alive, and that's enough. There's a quiet kind of healing that comes not from doing, but from being. Not from changing, but from finally allowing yourself to stay as you are, without judgment, without the pressure to be profound. You are not broken because you haven't transformed. You are not behind because your wounds haven't taught you something beautiful. You are not a failed protagonist just because you're still in pain. You're not a lesson in progress. You're a person. You're here. You're real. Okay, even if nothing makes sense, even if there's no clarity, no neat ending, your presence still matters. Let yourself rest in the ambiguity. Let yourself be soft. Let yourself be ordinary. There is no one you have to impress. Okay. There is no future version of you watching and grading your progress. Okay. There's just now, and maybe now is enough. You don't need a purpose to be worthy. You don't need to be healed to be whole. You don't need to make the most of your pain. You can just breathe, you can just feel, you can just be. You are not a redemption arc in progress. You are a person, and that is enough.